Hello and welcome to the Face of Pro-Life. Today I'm speaking with Father Angelo Geiger from the Franciscanfriars of the Immaculate. Thank you so much for joining us today, Father.
You're welcome.
I was reading recently from the Guttmacher Institute's website. They have a bunch of, they're the research arm of Planned Parenthood, and they publish statistics yearly on different aspects of abortion. And one of the statistics that really shocked me was that 87% of abortions are performed on unmarried women, and there's pretty much true in Connecticut as well. This was close to 88% of the women who obtain abortions are unmarried, and it just really struck me that it's really the unborn that have become the biggest casualty of our lack of morals in this country. Do you see how we could better, make some strides against abortion if we, cleaned up our act a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the second wave of feminism really was abortion, and I think the rationale behind that was that if a woman's going to really achieve the kind of independence and dignity that the feminists held as an ideal, that they were going to need to be independent of men. And the one thing that makes a woman, need a man is that reality of children. And so abortion became a real core part of the feminist movement.
Which is so ironic because the original feminists, like Susan B. Anthony,
right,
they really felt that abortion was a complete evil, and that abortion itself was demeaning to women, and that women needed the vote so that society would be gentler and kinder to women and their children. Right. Not just women and their children, so that there wouldn't be a need for abortion, so that women could get ahead and be able to support their children. And so they were looking as the feminist movement as protecting children, and yet somehow more recently we've turned it around so that it's all about women and not about the kids.
Well, that was part of the plan on the part of people like Margaret Sanger, that goes way back. The sexual revolution, of course, didn't help things either, and people became more promiscuous, and the liars at the Kinsey Institute helped to promote the idea that women, were very promiscuous, generally in the United States. So that all had an effect on loosening people's morals, and once that happened, the reality of children and family, the inevitability of that, and the fact that that there would be pregnancies outside of marriage was not part of the feminist plan. So there had to be this way of remaining free of that burden. And I think all of this has come together to erode the value of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And these pregnancies outside of marriage, these unstable relationships, are a burden. Sometimes they happen to unmarried girls who are not, old enough or feel themselves ready for marriage, or more often it happens with people who have developed the habit of serial relationships, which is more and more today, I think, really the status quo. I mean, certainly what kids are learning in college, it's not even just serial relationships. It's now, unfortunately, it's not funny, but unfortunately it's more and more, it's, whatever, whether it's a male or female or, just crazy, the kind of morals, and marriage becomes more and more irrelevant.
Right. And children, seem to be the casualty of sex, meaning that everything, everything's free, doesn't matter what you do, but, as soon as there's a child involved, that really puts a crimp in their style, and so they become sacrificed because there's no room
Right.
for the children. And it just, a society can't go on like this. I just recently started volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center, and just today a woman called up and she was looking for some help, and she happened to be married, and everyone in the place, all the volunteers, were shocked that there was actually a woman who was pregnant that was married, because the majority of the people that come in there are not married. And it's amazing how many women come in.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have unplanned pregnancies within a marriage, and you have a husband very often, or maybe a working woman that doesn't want to have a child, and they go in for an abortion. But you talk about crisis pregnancies. A pregnancy outside of marriage is generally, by definition, a crisis pregnancy, one way or another.
Right, right.
Maybe not always, but it certainly, by definition, is, because that child needs a mom and a dad, and that's what marriage is about. We've gotten to the point now where we can't even bring ourselves to define what marriage is. The whole thing with same-sex marriage has descended into really just such an emotional and arbitrary discussion. We can't even honestly look at why the state involved itself in marriage. Now the sort of chick way of discussing the problem of same-sex marriage is to say, well, the state should just not be involved with marriage at all. If you want to get married, then you go to your church and let the churches decide what they want to make their rules.
Well, that's pretty much how it started out.
Huh?
Wasn't it? Wasn't that how marriage started out, in the church?
No, that's the point. It's not the church or the state that makes marriage. It's not the state. Marriage is a universal experience. It's always existed, in one form or another. Maybe not always with all the legal forms, but that there should be a public institution of man and wife. And that's recognized by society. One man, one woman, and for the benefit of children. That exists because men and women exist.
Right. And for the benefit of the state.
No,
it is the benefit of the
it is,
society.
That's why the state gets involved, because the state recognizes that marriage is good for society. That there needs to be this stable relationship between husband and wife for the benefit of children, because that is good for society. That's the reason why the state has been involved. You can't look back on state involvement in marriage and say, well, it was all a big mistake. It was just totally arbitrary. No, there's a reason why the state got involved. State got involved because marriage is good for society.
Right, right.
And it's necessary for society. But it didn't make marriage. Marriage existed because it's there, because there are men and women. And men and women come together and have babies.
Yeah. Otherwise, you have no society.
And it's the same way the same reason that the church got involved. It's more than that, because Christ elevated marriage to a sacrament. But the church didn't make marriage. Marriage exists because men and women exist. And if you can't define marriage that way, you're being completely arbitrary about what it means. Totally arbitrary. This is what I want it to mean, because I want to get married. Well, then you just redefine it and say whatever you want. It's become totally, a political football, a football for those who are promoting, gay rights. I want this because you have it, and you can't tell me I can't have it. Well, you can have it. You want to marry a woman? Go ahead and, you're a man. You want to marry a woman? You can do it just as much as I can. But you want to marry a man, and
What's
you're a
the
man.
point? Yeah.
I mean, it's not marriage. It's just become a totally semantic argument based on perceived emotional needs.
But
And it becomes largely also a means of coercing people to accept a lifestyle which up until recently most people consider to be immoral. So that's the situation in which we find ourselves as we confront the problem of abortion. Abortion has made it worse, you know. I mean, you had the advent of sexual promiscuity through the sexual revolution and ideals of radical feminists that made abortion a kind of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to live this way, well, you know, contraception doesn't always work, so then you've got yourself a real problem. And people who are hooked up in these relationships, very often they're very dysfunctional relationships. They lead to the habit of serial relationships. You know, it's kind of easy. I'm a priest. I don't have the, you know, but you see people, don't they learn? I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's like you never learn from these bad experiences. And people want love, and they love falling in love, and I think there's this habit. People never become adults.
Mm.
You know, there's that thing of romance and love which is meant to be experienced usually by young people,
Yeah.
you know, in that
Yeah.
particular way, so that they'll hook up, get married, and have children.
Yeah.
But it's like everyone wants to live the romance of the dating game forever, their whole life long. And when it doesn't generate, you know, what they're looking for, then they go look somewhere else.
I think part of the problem, you say they never grow up. I think part of the problem is that in our society nowadays, we force adult actions on our kids, such as sexual action, without any forcing them ever to grow up emotionally and maturity and responsibility. You know what I mean? It's like
that's exactly it. They don't grow up because you can't give a child something like that.
Exactly.
And expect them to grow up.
Exactly.
They
You
can't
need to.
they can't process it. They can't.
It's child abuse.
It is child abuse, and it leads to irresponsible behavior, and it's such a powerful aspect of human existence that it's like a drug.
Yeah, yeah. And so you don't.
And then when society adopts it and says this is such a great thing,
yeah.
and it's perfectly normal, and you know, you go to the movies and watch television, and these kinds of relationships are just totally normalized, then, you know, there is this, you end up with this, I mean, tremendous statistic, 87%. I mean, it should be slapping us in the face. Wake up, wake up. 87% of all abortions are with unmarried women.
Yeah. And we're not talking 87% of 100 people. We're talking 1.2 million each year. That's a lot of people women are having abortions that aren't married. And you even the ones who aren't having abortions, all of this activity of not being married, I just see so many kids that are lost in this. You know, the woman who has, you know, 3 kids from, you know, 3 different men, you know, or the couple who, you know, they have the mixed marriage, so she's got 2 kids and he's got 2 kids, and then they have kids, and nobody feels like they're really part of a central family.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation, and it's hard to deal with it. You know, people have experienced this. They're part of it. You know, they're either from these kinds of families, or they're, you know, formed these kinds of families as adults and parents, and
like it's normal. It's
normal. It's become normal, and people are very sensitive about it, and so it's hard to talk about it, but it really needs to be talked about.
And how do we reverse that? Because it's really a tragic situation. You know, I know kids who their parents aren't married, and well, to each other, but then they marry other people, and the kid in the middle is, you know, has half brothers on this side and half brothers and sisters on this side, and they don't belong. They don't belong to either one of the families. I mean, it's sad.
These are the more or less normal situations that people find themselves in. I just want to emphasize that you know, we need to we need to start a dialogue and get people to talk about these things, and it won't be easy because again, like, we got people in these situations. They're very, very defensive about it, and like I say, it's not a question of blaming anybody. It's a question of talking about the reality and not living with our heads in the sand, and hopefully, we can have the dignity, self-respect, and generosity to try to bequeath to our children, our grandchildren, something better than we had.
Exactly.
And everybody carries baggage from their families, from their parents. It's not a sometimes it becomes in our culture, we play the blame game, and there's always somebody else responsible for our actions. I'm not trying to feed into that. We all have baggage. It's not a question of blaming. It's a question of thinking about what we can do to make things better
like
for ourselves.
What do we really want for ourselves, and what do we want for our children?
And to simply say that we're better off with divorce, abortion, and single-parent families and kids who don't know who their parents are is just we've been brainwashed.
I know. Well, we definitely need to be telling our daughters.
People, I think, have lost hope. I don't know. They've become so depraved, or have lost hope, that they just don't see it as a possibility. But I think we need to be persistent. We need to be persistent, and it needs to be talked about from our pulpits. It needs to be talked about in our Catholic schools.
In our homes.
In our homes. Yeah.
We definitely need to be teaching our daughters, that, and our sons, we need to teach them chastity and teach them that we need to save ourselves for marriage. And if people make mistakes, then you have to own up to your responsibilities. And I don't understand how are we going to get that?
It's a multifaceted approach. So much has to be done. It's like to change one thing, you have to change everything. Yet marriage is a linchpin. The political side of things is important because it's the law of the land that has made this possible. But we certainly can't rely, on politicians. We should keep their feet to the fire, and we should vote for the right people, and we should make use of our right of petition and all the rest. Those things are necessary. We have to do those things. But we have to change minds and hearts. We have to change the way people think. We can't allow abortion to be such a convenient thing, such a thing that seems to be necessary and an easy way of dealing with this problem, because there's a lot of people in this world that are just they're gonna do what seems to be the thing that gets them out of the trouble at that particular moment. And there's a lot of other people in this world who are completely willing to facilitate that process, no matter what it involves. The women that go into the abortion clinic don't see abortion the same way that the people who are providing it see it.
Right. It's a very difficult decision for a woman to make, and the majority of women don't want to be there. So what we need to do is help them step back before they get to the point where they feel that they need the abortion. And one of the things that we were talking about is marriage, because if we make marriage something that both the men and women aspire to, then they and their children will be much better off. And you talk about the feminists, and I agree that the vocal feminists would denigrate marriage and say that marriage is enslaving women and saying stupid things like that. But the majority of women, girls, high school girls, college girls, I mean, face
They
it,
want to get
they
married.
want to get married. And they're doing everything possible to prevent that because there's no reason for the boys who generally don't want to get married to marry them because they're already getting from them what they would expect in a marriage.
Right.
So I know it sounds old-fashioned, but
Well, it's old-fashioned because the world's gone mad, and what is depraved has become normalized. Um, you know, same-sex marriage and the normalization of gay lifestyles is we're far down the road, and we're you know we're way down the road, and all of what we experience currently with that is a consequence of the rest, uh, and a lot of what has gone into the reasoning in the legalization of same-sex marriage has been, well, you know what, marriage is already eroded.
right.
So, I mean, people's attitudes towards marriage is already changed. So, what are we doing by what are we saving really when we say gay people can't get married? Because what people believed about marriage in the 1950s is not what we
Right.
believe now.
Right.
So it is old-fashioned, but I mean, it's common sense. You know, there's everything has its assets and liabilities. Like when people would get when a woman would get pregnant outside of marriage years back, you know, it was a scandal and a lot of pressure and stigma attached to that.
Yeah, to hide. So that
all
was the
that,
reason to get an abortion, to hide
right,
her.
but the other part of it was that there was a strong encouragement from society, the church, from parents to get married.
Right. That's true too.
And to some, you know, some of that was probably was positive results, and a lot of it wasn't.
Well, it would
But
save the baby.
That's the point. That in the end, that's the point. That you'd have a child born into this world, whereas otherwise you wouldn't. And that's ultimately what marriage is.
Yeah.
The marriage is that institution which provides that kind of stability for the child. And it doesn't happen automatically, and there's no easy solution, and we've got a long way to go to get back to where we ought to be. But the institutions and the realities, the definition of marriage and what it's supposed to be is there so that we know what we're supposed to do. Whether we do it or not is a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a very dysfunctional marriage and an abusive marriage, but to say, well, because there's lots of abusive marriage or abusive, you know, there's a lot of women who are abused by their husbands, blah, 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 that we're better off not knowing what marriage is or just being completely arbitrary about it as though it didn't matter. I mean, this is just craziness.
Mm-mm.
It's craziness. We have to talk to people about, you know, what the ideal is. We need to shoot for the ideal.
Yeah.
And if we shoot for the ideal, we'll come up with something
Better than what we have now.
yeah, something at least tolerable generally.
Yeah.
But that we have 2 million abortions a year and 87% of them are outside of marriage. How can people say that that's okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's.
I mean, even most people nowadays who say, well, abortion has to be legal in some circumstances, will openly admit that abortion is not a good thing. We're doing this because we have no other choice, because it needs to be there, and so blah, blah, blah. Most pro-choicers are that way nowadays.
Yeah.
It's not, they're not all a bunch of lying, insincere propagandists like the people who run Planned Parenthood. There's a lot of those too, but most of them will just say, you know, it's just such a hard thing. You can't, you know, I wouldn't do it, but you got to let people have that choice. It's got to be there because it's, you know, but it's not a good thing. They'll say it's not a good thing.
Yeah, nobody, yeah.
But just simply say, well, then we got to do something about it. If it's not a good thing, we've got to do something about it. Abortion is not a good solution. I think maybe that's a hopeful thing, is that we're at that point where people are willing to look back at it and say, you know, we've had 38 years of this, and maybe it wasn't really as good an idea as we thought it was, And now that we see the horror of the habits and the horror of what's going on in the abortion clinics, like the one in Pennsylvania,
Right.
maybe we need to revisit these things and convince ourselves that marriage matters, and that even if we're this far down the road, we have to fight our way back.
Yeah.
We have to start talking about the reality and using our heads. I mean, I think part of it is abortion. Abortion is hopelessness. We have to create a culture of unreality where people ignore the facts, where they get into these serial relationships and get hurt over and over and over again and have kids, and then start convincing themselves it's okay for all these kids not to know who their father is or whatever, and then to enter into this great political and social conspiracy, and really it is, which is abortion.
Mm-hmm.
People are lying about what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, they're burying their heads in the sand and have to lie. Why? Because it's a horrible solution.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely nightmarish solution, and we can do better than abortion.
Yeah.
We have to do better than abortion. It's stupid. It's crazy.
Well, I think people in general just need to have a better image of their own selves and understand, that they are created in the image and likeness of God, and that they need to love themselves more than what they have allowed themselves to become.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of work in the family, fatherhood, motherhood, giving kids a sense of their own value, especially girls, not letting girls think that somehow their value or their identity depends upon whether, a man has some sexual interest in them and all this kind of thing. They have to have the dignity to be able, people need to be able to say no. This is not good for me. I'm worth more than this, and that's a big problem.
And maybe parents need to learn how to say no to their kids so that their kids can learn how to say no in return when the time comes. It is a big problem, and I'm glad, you could come and talk about this with me.
Okay.
We hope that you've learned something. We hope that you talk to your kids about their value and how the marriage itself is very valuable, not just to the children involved, but to the partners and to society. And we hope when you look in the mirror next time, you realize yours too is the face of pro-life. Please join us again next time.